Hello everyone! Today we're going to take a break from the news flash as one of our American legends has passed. On April 28th, Michael Collins passed away at the age of 90. This video, we're going to take a look at his contribution to space exploration and reflect on his wonderful life. Michael Collins was born on October 31st in Rome, Italy, to a U.S. Army officer. When the time came, he followed in his father's footsteps and received the appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in military science in 1952. Funny enough, his classmate was soon-to-be fellow astronaut Ed White. After graduating, he joined the U.S. Air Force. Flying came easily to him, and unlike many of his colleagues, he had little fear of failure. He was awarded his wings upon completion of a course at Waco, and in September 1953, he was chosen for advanced day fighter training at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, flying F-86 Sabres. The training was dangerous. 11 people were killed in accidents during the 22 weeks he was there. Collins' postings at Mobile Training Detachment, MTD, which he hated, allowed him to accumulate over 1,500 flying hours, the minimum required for admission to the U.S. Air Force Experimental Flight Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base, California. He became a member of Class 60C, which included Frank Borman, Jim Irwin, and Tom Stafford, who later became astronauts. The inspiration for Collins in his decision to become a NASA astronaut was the Mercury Atlas 6 flight of John Glenn on February 20th, 1962, and the thought of being able to circle around the Earth in 90 minutes. Collins applied for the second group of astronauts that year. In mid-September, he found out that he had not been accepted. It was a blow, even though he did not expect to even be selected. That year, the United States Air Force Experimental Flight Test Pilot School became the United States Air Force Aerospace Research Pilot School, as the Air Force tried to enter into space research through the X-15 and X-20 programs. Collins applied for a new postgraduate course offered into the basics of spaceflight. He was accepted into the third class on October 22nd, 1962. Other students in his 11-member class included 3 future astronauts: Charles Bassett, Edward Givens, and Joe Engle. At the start of June, NASA once again called for astronaut applications. Collins went through the same process as he did with his first application, though he did not take the psychiatric evaluation. He was at Randolph Air Force Base, Texas on October 14th when Deke Slayton, the chief of the astronaut office at NASA, called and asked if he was still interested in becoming an astronaut. By this time, Collins had flown over 3,000 hours, of which 2,700 were in a jet aircraft. Now, Collins enters NASA as the third group of 14 astronauts, and they begin training. After basic training, the third group were assigned specializations. Collins received his first choice: pressurized suits and EVA/spacewalks. His job was to monitor development and act as a liaison between the astronaut office and contractors. In late June 1965, Collins received his first crew assignment, the backup pilot for Gemini 7, with his West Point classmate Ed White. Collins was the first of 14 to receive a crew assignment. Under the system of crew rotation established by Slayton, being on the backup crew of Gemini 7 set Collins up to pilot Gemini 10. After the successful completion of the Gemini 7 on January 24, 1966, Collins was assigned to the prime crew of Gemini 10. Gemini 10 lifted off from Launch Complex 19 at Cape Canaveral on July 18, 1966. It was the 8th crewed Earth-orbiting spacecraft of the miniseries. It carried John Young and Mike Collins with the primary purpose to conduct rendezvous and docking tests. Collins and Young completed nearly all of the major objectives of the flight. After Gemini 10, Collins began training for the Apollo program. He trained as a command module pilot. Already had the training, he was assigned Capcom for Apollo 8. The successful completion of the first crewed circumlunar flight was followed by the announcement of the Apollo 11 crew of Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. At that time, in January 1969, it was not certain this would be the lunar landing mission. This depended on the success of Apollo 9 and Apollo 10 testing the lunar module. Here comes the big Apollo 11. As command module pilot, the training for the mission was much different than Buzz Aldrin, with simulators. There were measurements for pressured suits, centrifuge training to simulate the re-entry, and practicing docking with a huge rig at NASA Langley Research Center. Since he would be the active participant in the rendezvous with the LM, Collins compiled a book of 18 different rendezvous schemes for various scenarios, including ones where the LM did not land or it launched too early or too late. This book ran for 117 pages. This is really interesting. During the training for Apollo 11, Slayton offered to get Collins back into the crew sequence after the flight, but he told Slayton he did not want to travel to space again if Apollo 11 was successful. The difficult schedule of an astronaut strained his family life. He wanted to help achieve John F. Kennedy's goal of landing on the moon within the decade and had no interest in further exploration of the moon once the goal had been achieved. As we know, Apollo 11 was a huge success, but during his day flying solo around the moon, Collins said he never felt lonely. Although it has been said, quote, "Not since Adam has any human known such solitude." Collins felt very much a part of the mission. In his autobiography, he wrote, "This venture has been structured for 3 men, and I consider my third to be as necessary as either of the other 2. In the 48 minutes of each orbit, when he was out of radio contact with the Earth while Columbia passed around the far side of the moon, the feeling he reported was not of fear or loneliness, but rather awareness, anticipation, satisfaction, confidence, and almost exultation." Mike Collins is often referred to as the unsung hero of spaceflight, but the accomplishments he has made throughout space history and exploration will never be forgotten. We were lucky enough to get an interview with him, and here are some of our favorite clips.
For me, it was a long staircase. I went to the military academy because I thought it was a good free education. The next thing I knew, I was at Edwards Air Force Base as an experimental test pilot. All of a sudden there was this thing called NASA, and it seemed like a logical progression on this stair step. So, being by myself in lunar orbit, in some ways it was old hat. I and Stu Russa had been flying airplanes by ourselves for years and years, so the idea of being in a flying machine solo somewhere might not be as earth-shaking to either of us as you might imagine. I was looking out the window at the lunar horizon, and there was a little bloopy of the Earth, and I all of a sudden said to myself, holy, that is 3 billion plus 2 over there, and over here 1 plus, I don't know. Well, I think as you know from your work in Back to Space, there are a number of ways you can approach the problem of today's young people going on to some other career and just bypassing space. I think one thing that comes to our aid right now is the planet Mars. It's always been there. It's always, it's in fact a more interesting place to visit than is the moon. So my approach, if I were wanting to draw the young people into space, would be, I think I'd start talking about Mars, like maybe nothing else existed out there. I know that's a simplistic approach, but I think it would be a powerful one.
Thank you, Mike Collins, for everything you did for spaceflight at Astra.